Then the Turtons came to town, Ray and David, and I found for the first time something interesting. Ray was a woman. Her name is Rayma, and as David said, thought we were a couple of milliners, did you? They were very witty and very humorous people, and they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. They had a website, which Tessa has already mentioned, called The Source, and it's used by Australian schools and libraries. It was in those days. It had entries for all the Australian children's book, all detailed and annotated, so you can find books not just by author and title, but by genre, and best of all for teachers, by their subject matter. Which means if you would tell a kid to go to the library and get a book about hurricanes, they don't have to go and ask the librarian, who usually knows if you're lucky, but they can actually find it by looking up the source. They asked me, would I write the New Zealand book entries? And I can remember quite clearly thinking, oh, a couple hundred books, no problem. So I agreed. After that, I found it involved writing detailed entries for every title, specifying subjects, main themes, book type, genre, overview of the plot and characters, and I was also supposed to do the back titles. And so I've written it on my new filing system. This week I did the 2,730th book, and it's a very satisfying feeling. The Source also has short story sections. Over the years I've added all the stories of Frank Sargison, Witi Haumara, Patricia Grace, and all the classic Maori myths and legends. And with the Source, because it's computer linked, they all connect, which is good. So you can make connections from Maori myths and legends, stories that are based on them. You can go from the story of the terrible bird that's eating people here in Canterbury to a novel by, say, Jonah Orwin called Owl, which is probably my favourite novel of all time. And the links between the two can be made, so you can see the influence one way and the other. Not only that, you can also find poems and songs. You can even find the various All Black haka on it. It's a lovely website. Quite a few New Zealand schools have it, quite a few public libraries have it. Auckland Public Library has it. Christchurch City Library doesn't have it. Oh dear, shame, too bad. The nice thing is that I got to spend all this time fidgeting around the Margaret Mahi collection for the old books. And for the new books, I would come down to the children's bookshop on Victoria Street, and Sheila Sinclair would let me sit quietly down the back making notes. And after a while, the publishers very kindly started sending me review copies of their books. Now, in the meantime, I joined the Children's Literature Foundation, which just changed its name, I think, to Storylines. And I still remember talking on the phone to the lady who rang me up about my subscription. And she said, oh, I'm not sure if there's anybody down there in Canterbury who's a member. Vida Pickles, maybe? And Bill Nagelkirk. Perhaps you could talk to him. And I found out, luckily, that there were a lot more people there, and she didn't know about them, but they were here. And I became involved with the Christchurch branch. And I even got dragged in when they launched their family days. The Storylines family days, if you've got children, you'll know about them. They're free. That's the first thing you need to know. Run by volunteers. They're a wonderful open day when the children can meet their favourite authors and illustrators and take part in all sorts of activities. My work, because I'm loud, was working at the Reading Aloud section, where writers like Gavin Bishop, Ben Brown, Kyle Mewburn, those sort of people, read their stories. And until you've seen someone like Margaret Mahi or Joy Cowley interacting with your audience, you haven't appreciated the power of narrative. It used to be held in the town hall, and we used to go to fill all those great big rooms with rapt kids. Since the earthquake, the family days carry on. They're down in a place like the South Library, which is slightly more crowded, but still great. Meanwhile, Bruce Rennie, the literary editor of the press, they still had literary editors in those days. I think they're now called the books editor, which sounds awful. The literary editor of the press had decided to give more space to children's literature. And he used the famous Bob Doherty to review young adult novels, and he used me to do the picture books. We alternated. Now, space is at a premium in newspapers, and it's shrinking all the time as the advertising falls back. So this is a pretty brave decision by Bruce. We'd had to work on him for a while to get him to it, of course. It also gives me and Bob a chance to get sort of a continuity of coverage and to emphasise the quality of the books and that kind of thing. As a bonus, our reviews also appear in the Waikato Times and the Dominion Post. There was a downside. For some time, my daughter, Margaret, was my editor, which was difficult. She wouldn't give me a pay increase, you know, for the television column. Yes, yes. Do be sure to mention this to her. No, it's no use. She's got another job now. There's no money in children's writing, you know that. Other things were developing. There was a very keen group, and there were different people, with same people with different hats, launched Te Tai Tamariki. You can see the signs, storylines there, and there's a big white one. Yeah, that's right, round the back by Mary Sangster, who did a lot of organising tonight. Thank you, Mary. There's a very keen group launched Te Tai Tamariki, which is the New Zealand Children's Literature Charitable Trust, which is going to try to preserve original manuscripts and illustrations of our children's books. And they've been doing a good job. They've got a lot of stuff tucked away. And then, of course, the earthquake struck and had to be rescued from the offices above the children's bookshop, but they were, which is good. And the same familiar people did a lot of the work. I just want to mention two of them. One's Rosemary Sladen, who's here somewhere. Rosemary, right beside me, yes. And Rosemary Bonkowski, who is way down the back. Now, Rosemary's leaving New Zealand for Australia tomorrow. She's been here selling her house and cars and got that. And I'm so glad, and I particularly value her presence here tonight. It's a big sacrifice. Thank you, Rosemary. Thank you, Rosemary, both. Like the people who I've been talking about, I find that I also wear several hats. When the press commissioned me to interview Anthony Horowitz about his Sherlock Holmes novel, an adult novel, called The House of Silk, I was also able to talk to him about his young adult novels and find out what was happening to Alex Rider, and I got a Magpies article out of that, and about his TV series Foyle's War, so I used that for my television column. Unfortunately, I also had my history teacher's hat on, so our conversation turned a little bit sour at the end when I told him that Sherlock Holmes didn't actually use his gasogene to light his cigarette. And he said, yes, he did. And I said, no, gasogene's actually a soda siphon. Horowitz was thinking of a thing called a gasolier, which is sort of a chandelier with gas flames on it. And I love the idea of Holmes writing a cigarette with a soda siphon. Andy Horowitz was very nice about it, really. He wasn't well pleased, but it was a fun article. It got 3 articles for me. Fun interview. There are all sorts of unexpected joys in book reviewing. I'm very proud that Agnew Neuenhausen used my reviews of Bernard Beckett's Genesis and Thieves by Ella West in her marvellous volume, Right Book, Right Time, 500 Great Reads for Teenagers. She wrote 498 of them, I wrote 2. I'm also proud to say I once frightened the author of the Dexter serial murder novels. You've all watched Dexter on television, haven't you? Yeah, mass murderer. I frightened the author by the quality of my research. He was in terror. He said, don't print that, whatever you do, don't tell anybody that. Because I knew where he lived. Do you want to know where I found the information? On the back flap of his book. But it's interesting. These people have little loopholes they haven't thought about. Orson Scott Card. Anybody ever heard of him? Oh, good, good. Orson Scott Card, the famous science fiction writer, once frightened me. I walked into the old Scorpio books where he was talking to a small group of fans, and he looked up and he said, oh, you'll be Trevor Agnew, the reviewer. And his wife picked me up off the floor and said, you should have seen your face. It was only later I realised that my rotten daughter Margaret, then a press journalist, had set it up with him when she was interviewing him. Another bonus was being selected as one of the judges for the New Zealand Post Children's Book Awards, along with Rosemary Tisdale, another Rosemary, also from the National Library, and Ruth McIntyre of the Wellington Children's Bookshop. One surprise there for us judges was the number of self-published books. People were publishing their own books, and being optimistic, they sent them into the contest. The biggest surprise was how awful some of those books were. They give you a good idea of just how important an editor is, a designer, anybody who has anything to do with laying out the type, arranging the pictures on the page, all this sort of stuff. It's amazing how bad some of those books were. Slack writing, spelling, grammar, and page layout. It was straight back to marking at school. And John McIntyre, the famous husband, says, life is too short to review bad books, and he's right. But I have to do them all for the source, and studying some of those self-published monstrosities was a valuable reminder of how those book designers and book editors and proofreaders, how important they are. There was an extra surprise as a judge. I learned something really exciting. Do you ever watch Miriam Makamo on Sunday nights? Well, she was the presenter. And one of our jobs was to choose the dresses for her. This was good. She arrived there with a big suitcase on wheels. She had borrowed from Television New Zealand, jam full of dresses, and said, okay, which one? And my 2 assistants did all the judging. I took a photo of them doing it. They chose the dresses. It's an interesting life. She was superb. She pronounced every Maori name perfectly. There wasn't one name she got wrong except mine. I was announced at the Auckland Town Hall as Trevor Agnew. There's another bonus that reviewers sometimes get. We all know that people sometimes regard reviewers as terrible people. There was a musical at the court a few months ago that described reviewers as bottom feeders, which is rather nice. It's probably true too. Certainly well down the food chain. Errol Braithwaite became so annoyed with one reviewer's attack on he had wrote a series of novels about the New Zealand Wars, and there was a chap, Hall, wrote some really snotty reviews. So in the last novel, Errol brought in a soldier called Trooper Hall, and he was a bit of a coward. He had high hopes, idiot. He got shot in the stomach and he was left weeping to die in a ditch. And I'm never quite sure whether Hall got the joke or not. But I panicked a bit when I learned that David Hill had named a minor character after me, especially when I found the book was about the Wahine sinking. The character turned out to be a member of the Air Force and behaved very bravely. I'm glad to report that she survived the shipwreck. Best of all, though, was a very cryptic heads-up message I received from Dave Gunson. Now, you probably may not know Dave Gunson, but he's a wonderful artist. He writes good books too, but he does gorgeous pictures. And if you've seen pictures of New Zealand dinosaurs, he's probably painted them. Wildlife books. And this one is about a library cat. The library cat has been kept on at the library because he kills rats every so often. In actual fact, there's only one rat, and he's got a racket running with him. Every so often the cat walks through the library with the rat in his mouth. And the rest of the time they spend eating the food in the library kitchen or playing with the books. And there's some marvellous fun about the books. But Dave Gunson's message was quite simple. It wasn't about the pretty pirate ships or anything like that. He said, look in the fridge. So I went through to the page where the cat and the rat are opening the fridge and going through for the food. And I had a little look, and over in the corner is a packet of fruit juice. It's called Agnew's Good Taste Kiwi Fruit Juice.